his counsel, for his loyalty, for his friendship, and above all, for his integrity. I wish David and his wife Annie a long and a happy retirement, full of visits with laughing grandchildren, untroubled waters to paddle, and smooth roads to ride. And, Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
So while we wait for senators to come back to the floor, we had a discussion this morning on Washington Journal about budget negotiations. Let's see as much of that as we can.
Well, Scott Garrett is here now. He's a Republican congressman from New Jersey, and he's a member of the Budget Committee and the Financial Services Committee. Good morning. Thank you for being here.
It's always good to be back with you. Thanks.
Boy, the callers have been knocking Congress, as you folks
would they do that?
Yeah,
I don't understand.
Who knows? But the Washington Post has this cartoon this morning that speaks to this matter.
Okay.
Spot the differences, they say. See if you can even find one. They have a picture of Congress in recess and Congress in session, and guess what? The pictures look exactly alike. Well, what do you make of all this bashing of Congress heading into the break?
So, not a good sign. It's never good for the public not to have a degree of confidence in their elected representatives. But certainly an understandable one when you've had so much squabbling over the issues, when you can't get things done. That's the refrain when I get back home into New Jersey, is why don't you just guys come together and resolve these issues? And I briefly explained it to them that the problem is this way. I usually go back to the budget issue. I said, it's hard to reach an agreement if I write down, here's my proposal, and I come to the table like this, and then I'm waiting for the person on the other side of the aisle to come to the table with his proposal. And if he either A, doesn't come to the table, or B, doesn't come to something specific in writing that we can compromise on or reach the middle ground, you're not going to get something done. And that, of course, was an example with the budget for 4.5 years or 5 years without any budget coming from the Senate whatsoever. We had our document. They had nothing. So there was no meeting of the minds then.
That being said, take us deeper into your party's split, as The Hill puts it. The headline here is Republican Fiscal Splits Erupt. They're talking here about Congressman Harold Rogers, who chairs Appropriations. This transportation and housing bill pulled off the floor. Not enough support. A lot of the write-ups this morning say this doesn't bode well for the rest of the budget process, and that the Republicans are basically fighting with each other and maybe abandoning Paul Ryan's budget.
Let me address those in reverse order if I can. No, maybe, and sort of. So, no. Your last question was, are we abandoning Paul Ryan's budget? I'm on the Budget Committee, been there for 10 years, and I supported it. Supported this time, and in the past as well. No, I don't think we're abandoning it at all. I saw Chairman Rogers' comments in the paper. I think that were the comments of a frustrated chairman, because he's got to be frustrated having done all the work based upon the Ryan budget, what we all came around and agreed upon, and then at some point in time, I guess leadership knew that they just were too close on the votes. But that happens. You know, the Republican Party is not the monolithic party in some ways that the Democrat Party is. You can sort of see that they work off of one set of talking points and they can get things done in that sort of manner. We do have disagreements and disputes. We are a conservative caucus now, probably more conservative than any time that I've ever been here in the past. And that's a good thing because it leads us in the right direction with regard to fiscal sanity and fiscal stability. But there are going to be some disagreements. And I guess on that one particular bill, there was folks who made the case that they wanted more money, I don't know what, for Amtrak, for this or that. My guess, my prognostication on this, is that sooner rather than later when we come back, we'll work out some of those differences and we'll be able to go back to the floor with it.
We invite your questions and comments for the Congressman. He is Scott Garrett, Republican of New Jersey, 6th term. Represents the 5th District of New Jersey, towns called Glen Rock and Newton. What part of the state is that?
The nicest part of the state. It's the top of New Jersey. It's the very top of New Jersey. I always describe it from river to river, from the Hudson River to the Delaware River, Warren, Sussex, Bergen, Passaic County.
Our guest spent about a dozen years in the New Jersey General Assembly before coming to the U.S. House. He's a member of the Budget Committee and the Financial Services Committee in the House currently. So the President went to the Hill yesterday. Right. To visit House and Senate Democrats separately. What do you make of the President's current posture on negotiations? Says he won't negotiate on a debt ceiling or what he calls a manufactured crisis. What do you make of all that?
So I saw the President, actually. I was over in the Capitol Visitor Center, and there he goes by, and got to say hi to the President for a brief passing moment. What do I make with regard to his posture on these things? I would guess posture is probably a pretty good word. It is just posturing by the President. In other words, we're not hearing anything new from the President. He's going around the country in what some people have described as campaign-type events, and not really saying anything different than he has in the past. You know, I gave you the example at the start of the program about having to or wanting to reach an agreement with the other side on these things and having to have something specific. We haven't gotten anything more from him than talking points. But you may remember last cycle. Who was it? CBO, Congressional Budget Office, who scores things. They said what with regard to the President? They said, well, we cannot score a speech. Well, neither can we. We can't put a figure on a speech. We can't put a figure on a campaign stump program or speech. We need him to be able to actually engage, stay here in Washington while we're in Washington, and engage in these matters. And if we do that, then I'd be a little more optimistic that those initial callers they got in this program would turn around and say things are getting done.
One more item before we get to the calls. Going into the August break, what can you point to in terms of success? Where's a positive in your view, and what is your biggest frustration right now?
So let me reverse that. So the frustration is what we've been talking about, is not being able to get more done. Success is the fact that we have moved some of the, we talked about appropriations bills, moved some of those through the process. I serve, as you pointed out, on financial services. We moved a whole slew of bills, both through our subcommittee, through the full committee, and now off of the full floor as well, sent them over to the Senate in the financial service realm to try to provide some sort of certainty, if you will, to the marketplace. So you have the financial papers in front of you. One of the words I always hear when I talk to Main Street or to Wall Street is there's not enough certainty in the markets right now. There's not enough certainty in all the regulation. So we have done a lot in that area, and we did it to a point, a common theme of today's discussion, in a bipartisan manner as well. We've moved a lot of legislation jointly out of our committee and through the floor and bipartisan.
First call for the Congressman. Mary from Yorktown, Virginia, independent. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. Hey, good
What's
morning,
fiscal insanity is paying $1 trillion a year for welfare and another 50 to 100 billion in extended unemployment. You know, these people are sitting at home. You have callers before talking about wanting to get back to work. Why in the world is President Obama talking about jobs, yet he's not talking about kicking out 7 million illegal workers that are doing non-agricultural jobs? You know, it makes no sense that that people are pushing for amnesty for the illegals here. All of them are going to get work permits, or most of them. That's insane. You don't add, 11 to 18 million more people when 14 to 22 million people are looking for work.
Thanks for calling, Congressman.
Yeah, the caller makes a good point. It's a refrain that I hear back in my district that unemployment in the country is still too high, that something has to be done about it. We have passed a number of pieces of legislation related to jobs to try to turn that situation around. As with a lot of our legislation, it goes to the Senate, and as I always say, the Senate is where all good bills go to die. But the caller also makes the point as far as with regard to immigration. That is one of the frustrating aspects about that as well. In any reform, and we do want to have reform with regard to immigration, we have to look where our focus is at first, and that should be here, the United States, and the citizens of this country and their concerns. And this caller, maybe she's out of work or knows people are out of work. We have to be concerned about them first and foremost.
You mentioned your district a couple of times so far. Will you hold town meetings in August?
Sure. I'll be going out and doing those sort of things. August is also a time for county fairs up in our neck of the woods, right? So we'll be at them, and they're almost like their own town hall meetings right there, because you walk around, you're at there's literally tens of thousands of people at the fair, and they turn into mini town hall meetings, if you will. Yeah.
USA Today has this headline: GOP faces heat at home on immigration. Do you face heat on immigration, or heat, as they put it, on anything else? What are those town meetings like?
So people are, just like this previous caller, people are upset, people are concerned, people who are out of work themselves are very concerned, people who know family members or others, like this caller may, are very concerned. And yeah, you want to call it heat, people bring your concerns to you, whether it's at the county fair or you're going to the A&P just shopping. It could be an official event, or you're just out with your family. People will approach me because they recognize my face, I guess. And I don't have to be in the district. I could be over in Manhattan on business or something else there, and people say, I know you, I see you on TV, and I know you're a congressman, and they'll bring up these concerns to you as well. So you get it wherever you go. And the concerns are about the economy, about jobs, about the uncertainty in the marketplace. There's just, people are concerned about their families. They want to make sure they're going to continue to have a job, be able to pay their bills, send their kids to college, pay their educational expenses, so on and so forth. So that's what we hear about. There's a headline here in the Washington Post: economic growth defies fears. They write that GDP increased at 1.7% annual rate in second quarter, much faster than many had expected. What does that mean to you? Yeah, well, you always have to say as expected. I mean, if you look at it, the previous article, and maybe a day or a week ago, those projections were less than expected. Overall, the economy continues to be in a sluggish state. Unlike any previous recovery period after recession. This is one of the worst recessions, of course, that we were out in since the Great Depression. But if I had a little chart here, I would show that we've had a series of other recessions since the Great Depression. And if I had a little chart here, it would show that after each one of those prior recessions, you had an uptick in the marketplace, an uptick in economic development at a much greater rate than it is right now. So this one little article might now say be positive, but overall we're doing much worse than ever in the past history. To Rome, Georgia now, Rosemary, Republican, for Congressman Scott Garrett.
Good morning. Going into the long 6-week break, what budget negotiations will be taking place by staff during this long break?
Mr. President, is the Senate in morning business?
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without
be allowed
objection.
to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise this morning to speak about my good friend and a great friend of this institution who will be leaving us this week, Dave Sciappa. I remember after I got elected in 2002, there was a transition in the leadership on the Republican side from Trent Lott to Senator Bill Frist. And Trent told me one day that the first thing he told Bill Frist was, you go make sure that Dave Sciappa is going to be your floor leader. And that's exactly what Bill did. I was new to the United States Senate, did not know my way around at all, much less know the rules. And I simply don't know how I would have functioned over the last 10 years without Dave Sciappa being here. He has been that valuable to all of us as members of the Senate. He is available, frankly, to both sides of the aisle. I've heard a number of my Democratic friends over the last 24 hours since we became aware of Dave's departure who have said, gee, I don't know what I'm going to do without Dave Schiappa being here. So our floor leaders are all so vitally important, and we do reach out to those members on the other side who inform us from time to time of what's going on. They're always straight with us, and this institution couldn't operate without them. And Dave has certainly been our leader. He's very smart, very knowledgeable, and he's very hardworking. All of these folks work such long hours. They're here long after we're here, and they're here well before we get here the next morning. And we owe a deep debt of gratitude to all of them, but particularly when someone like Dave Schiappa, who's been here for 28 years, makes a move on to another life. It's imperative that we say, Dave, thanks for your great work. Thanks for your inspiration to all of us. Dave knows this institution probably better than any member on the Republican side, certainly. And the one thing I will always remember Dave for is that Dave, number one, keeps his word. If you tell him that you have an issue with a bill or an issue with a nominee or that you have an amendment you want to get called up, Dave takes care of you. And he has been so valuable to all members of the Senate during his tenure, and we're truly going to miss him. But I know the next life is going to hold great things for him. He'll be very successful there, and we certainly wish him the best. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that my next comments be placed in the record immediately prior to the vote on Samantha Power to be the next ambassador to the United Nations, as that's what I am rising to speak about.
Without objection.
I rise to promote and suggest to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that you support the nomination of Samantha Power to be the next ambassador to the United Nations. This is a very complex world that we live in today, and certainly the forum of the United Nations, in spite of some issues that all of us have had with that body over the years, it remains the one forum where the United States, number one, gets to exhibit strong leadership with our friends, allies, and our enemies around the world, or our adversaries. I shouldn't say enemies, but our adversaries. And a strong voice in the United Nations is imperative. Samantha Power is an individual who possesses the type of character, the type of strong background, the person who possesses the intellect and the right kind of ability to communicate to represent us today in this complex world at the United Nations. Samantha was born in Ireland but moved to the United States shortly thereafter. She was educated in the public schools in Atlanta, went on to be educated at Harvard and, at Yale and at Harvard. So obviously she has the intellect from a background standpoint to represent our country at the UN. Between her stints at Harvard and at Yale, she did reporting as a journalist on the ground, reporting on the Yugoslav wars, where she was hands-on, dodging bullets and being involved from the standpoint of making reports to various journals and other publications about what was happening in those Yugoslav wars. Samantha is an individual who developed a passion for human rights, and she is not bashful about sharing that passion. And it is a commendable passion that she has for human rights. From 2005 forward, Samantha has been involved almost exclusively in the arena of foreign policy. First as a staffer for then Senator Obama, later involved in his campaign, and most recently as a member of the National Security Staff. Samantha is not just knowledgeable, she is knowledgeable in the right way when it comes to foreign policy. She's not only smart, but she's worldly. She has the charisma in her own way to, number one, express herself in a way that right now the United States needs to be expressing itself. And that's why I am so excited about the opportunity to see her on the ground at the United Nations representing our great country. She can be tough when she needs to be tough. She can be charismatic, and she can also be sharp-tongued. And with the adversaries that she's going to have to be dealing with at the United Nations, all of those assets are going to come into play. Samantha's going to do a great job as our next UN ambassador. I applaud her for her willingness to engage in public service, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to support her nomination to be the next ambassador to the United Nations. And I would yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President?
Senator from Florida.
We are in morning business, Mr. President.
We are.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to speak briefly here about Obamacare once again. This is an issue that's now coming to the forefront over the next few weeks as we get ready to start to implement portions of it across the country. We're starting to see the implications of it. And I think there's so much coverage given to this as a partisan fight between Republicans and Democrats or liberals and conservatives, but I actually think this issue goes much further than that because it's impacting all Americans. I understand the President was here yesterday and individuals from the White House as well. According to press reports, they were here to reassure nervous Democrats about the implementation of Obamacare and what it could mean. And I understand why people are nervous about this bill. They have a right to be. For example, the exchanges, which is these health care exchanges that are supposed to, if you can't get insurance, you're supposed to go to and be able to buy insurance. They're not going as planned. Just yesterday there was a news report that in Georgia they've asked for an emergency extension because they won't be up and running by October 1st. We're news reports of more people being pushed from full-time work to part-time work. The reason why, by the way, is because Obamacare says that if you have more than 50 employees at full-time status, there's certain rules you have to follow that are going to cost you money. So we're starting to see evidence that people are being moved from full-time to part-time. Some major companies are announcing that they're moving more people to part-time. There's reports of impending rate increases. In my home state of Florida, just 2 days ago, the insurance commissioner announced that the individual market rates, if you're buying insurance as an individual, your rates are going to go up by 30 or 40%. We know that there are many people in the middle class, hardworking Americans, who are happy with the health insurance coverage they have right now. They're probably going to lose that coverage. They're going to have to go to an exchange or another company that their company is now offering. That doesn't mean that you lose the insurance you're happy with. It means you lose the doctor, potentially. Because, you know, you can only go to a doctor that's in the network on your insurance plan. Well, if your new insurance doesn't have that doctor, you can't keep going to that doctor. So there is a lot of reason to be nervous about it. Add to that, by the way, that a lot of the original supporters of this, for example, the labor unions, the Teamsters just came out 2 weeks ago and said they want this thing suspended or repealed because it's breaking the promises that it made in terms of the 40-hour work week, you know, the whole argument I just made about full-time to part-time. And here's the irony. The labor union that represents the IRS workers is asking to be exempted from Obamacare, which is ironic because they're the very workers that are in charge of enforcing the law. So the people that are going to be in charge of enforcing Obamacare have asked to be exempted from Obamacare. There's a lot of reasons to be nervous about it if you're a supporter. But let me give you one more today, and that's the impact that it's going to have on our seniors. We haven't heard a lot of talk about this yet, but let me focus on one group of seniors in particular, and that is seniors that are on something called Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is a Medicare program where basically you contract with a private company to administer your benefits under Medicare. And how these companies compete for your business is that they add all sorts of value-added services. For example, transportation. My mom's on Medicare Advantage. And one of the reasons how they get her business is that in addition to good doctors, they actually will pick her up from home because she can't and doesn't drive and take her to her doctor's appointments. These are the kinds of benefits that Medicare Advantage offers. Here's the problem. Obamacare cuts about $156 billion out of Medicare Advantage. By the way, not to save Medicare, it throws it into the overall budget on Obamacare. Who uses Medicare Advantage? This is an interesting statistic. 40% of African Americans on Medicaid use Medicare Advantage. 53% of Hispanic beneficiaries who are on Medicare use Medicare Advantage. 38% of people on Medicare Advantage make less than $30,000 a year. So what's the impact of taking $156 billion out of Medicare Advantage? It's about $11 billion this year alone that you're taking out of the Medicare Advantage program. Well, that means, and the President would say, well, that means we're going to pay less money to these insurance companies. Fine. But what's the impact of that? Let me describe to you the impact of what it's going to be. First of all, you're going to see reductions in benefits, meaning a lot of these companies are going to have to save that money somewhere. And where they're going to save it is by reducing the benefits that they offer you on Medicare Advantage. So, for example, maybe there won't be any more transportation in my mom's Medicare Advantage plan. We don't know. Increases in copays, the amount of money that seniors are going to have to come up with every time they go to the doctor or the hospital. They're going to have to tighten physician networks, which means the number of doctors available to you is going to shrink. By the way, it means that if you have a doctor now that's been seeing you and they get kicked out of the network because they're tightening the network, you may not be able to keep going to that same doctor. So that disruption that it has. One study found that by 2017, seniors on Medicare Advantage could lose on an average about $1,841 a year. This is the impact. And let me tell you why this is pernicious, why this really hurts. Medicare Advantage, there's some things about it that need to be fixed, but it's a good program. It has good outcomes. The fact is these companies want you to go to your doctor's appointments. They want you to be getting your flu shot and your vaccine against pneumonia and things of that. Why? Because they want you to stay healthy. They need you to stay healthy in order for the plan to work. And you see it in the results. Medicare Advantage patients have 39% fewer hospital readmissions. 39% fewer. You leave the hospital, 39% reduction in people that end up going back because something went wrong. 24% fewer emergency room visits. 20% fewer hospital days. Medicare Advantage is a program that works. I can tell you that firsthand because I see it in my mom's life and I see it in the lives of thousands of seniors in Florida that are on Medicare Advantage. Now, you may ask yourself, well, if this is so bad, why haven't we heard any of this before? And the reason is because the insurance companies, because of a gag order, are prohibited from talking about any of this until you start getting your benefits letter, and they're coming. If you are a senior on Medicare Advantage, the chances are that soon you will open up the mail to the bad news that your Medicare Advantage that you have and that you're happy with has been changed in a negative way for you because of Obamacare. They don't know that yet because the companies have not been allowed to tell them yet, but they will have to tell them soon. And when they do, you will add one more concern that people should rightfully have about Obamacare and the impact that it's going to have on our people, particularly on seniors. And that's why, Mr. President, that's why my colleagues, I have become so passionate about this issue. One more reason why it's so important that we stop Obamacare. Now, you may say, well, what can we do to stop it? It's already the law. It's already in place. A lot of people have told me that. The answer is there is something we can do. And it comes as recently as September. In September, in order for this government to continue to function, we have to pass a short-term budget. I wish it were a long-term budget that was balanced, but it looks like it's going to be a short-term budget. Short-term budget, let's fund the government. Let's make sure Social Security checks go out. Let's make sure we're funding defense to keep our nation safe. Let's make sure we fund the government, but let's not keep funding Obamacare. Let's not keep pouring money into a program that even the unions are now against. Let's not keep pouring money into a program that not even the IRS workers who are going to enforce this want for themselves. Let's not keep funding this program that's going to hurt seniors on Medicare Advantage. Let's not keep funding it. Now, I'll tell you right away what the blowback is. Oh, you're threatening to shut down the government. No, I am not. I don't want to shut down the government. In fact, the only people who are talking about shutting down the government are the people that go around saying we will not support a short-term budget unless it funds Obamacare. Those are the people that are threatening to shut down the government. Their position basically is that Obamacare is so important that we can't possibly fund government without funding it. So if the government is shut down, and I hope that doesn't happen, because of Obamacare, that's an unreasonable position, especially in light of all the problems we know this program has. And this idea that unless we fund Obamacare, we must shut down the government, that is a false choice. That is not true. To my colleagues who oppose Obamacare, and let me just say that every single Republican opposes Obamacare, and I must share with you that there's a growing number of Democrats that are at least nervous about Obamacare and would love for it to go away in some way, shape, or form. In fact, one of them is the President. The President has actually delayed a major portion of Obamacare because he knows it's going to be a disaster. And so I would just say to those who oppose Obamacare, ask yourself this question. How can you possibly go back to the people who sent you here, to the people who are going to be hurt by this, to the people being moved from full-time to part-time, to the businesses that can't grow, to the individuals that are going to lose the coverage they're happy with and the doctor that they've gotten to know? How could you possibly go back to them, to the seniors on Medicare Advantage that are going to see their benefits reduced and their out-of-pocket costs go up? How can you possibly go back to them and say, I did everything I could to prevent these things from happening? How could you possibly say that to them if you vote for a budget that pays for this? This September gives us the last best chance to slow this down or to stop it. And once this law starts kicking in and it starts hurting our economy, we will start crossing some points of no return. And to my colleagues on the Republican side, I would just say, look, if we're not willing to draw a line in the sand on this issue, what issue are we willing to draw a line in the sand on? If we're not willing to fight to the end on this issue, what issue are you willing to do it on? Because right now I can think of nothing that is hurting our economy, I can think of nothing that's hurting job creation more than the uncertainty and the fear that this law is imposing on our small businesses, on our middle class, on our working class, and on our seniors. And I hope we will not let this last best chance go by. I hope we will take this opportunity to stop this law from hurting Americans, especially the millions of seniors that rely on Medicare Advantage for their health care. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Raymond T. Chen of Maryland to be United States Circuit Judge for the Federal Circuit.
Under the previous order, there will be 1 hour for debate, equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President.
Senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask to be recognized as if in morning business for up to no more than 3 minutes.
Without objection.
And let me express my thanks to the Senator Sanders for his willingness to give me this time and yield it. I'm here very briefly to commend Samantha Power to the entire United States Senate as the President Obama's nominee to be the UN Ambassador representing the United States of America. And I do so proudly because of the great work she's done against genocide and atrocities around the world, because she's been an outspoken leader in terms of doing what's right, and I think she has the courage to represent our country on the Security Council better than anyone I possibly know of. I got to know Samantha Power by reading her book, The Problem from Hell, the story about Rwanda and the genocide where 1 million people died while the rest of the world turned and looked the other way. Her calling on all people of democracies and freedom around the world to not let that happen again. When she came to the White House, she created the Commission on Atrocities for President Obama to focus on that, to see to it didn't happen again. And it was quite through her leadership that she forced President Obama and the administration to engage in Libya and end what would have been a genocide in Libya by Muammar Gaddafi. She's smart, she's intelligent, and she's tough, and she has a Georgia tie, which I'm very proud of. She graduated from a high school in DeKalb County, Georgia in the 1980s called Lakeside High School. And she did an internship between her first and second year at Yale University in Atlanta, Georgia, for a sportscaster who was doing a sports station in the city. He was asked a few days after she left to give some description of what kind of person Samantha Power was. And I want to read that quote to you because it's the kind of person you'd want representing you in the UN as your ambassador. He said, "Oh my God, was she bright, acerbic, lightning-witted, and the depth of the Mariana Trench." That's a quote from Jeff Hullinger, the first person she worked for in 1988. Samantha Power is the right person at the right time to represent the right country in the UN and on the Security Council. I commend her to the Senate and hope she receives a unanimous vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I have 5 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to congratulate hundreds and hundreds of young people throughout the country who are standing up for justice, who are putting a spotlight on one of the major economic crises facing this country. Today and this week and in recent weeks, we have had young people in New York City, in Chicago, in Washington, D.C., in St. Louis, in Kansas City, in Detroit, in Flint, Michigan, and other areas around this country who are fast food workers. They are the people who work in Burger King and work in McDonald's and work in Popeye. They're the ones who give you the hamburgers and the French fries. And what they are saying is workers all over this country, they cannot make it on $7.25 an hour, $7.50 an hour. Often they're unable even to get 40 hours of work, and in most cases they get no or very limited benefits. So all over the country, these workers, often young people, are walking out of their establishments, their fast food places, and are educating the consumers about the economic injustice taking place in these fast food establishments. And what they are saying is that we need to raise the minimum wage in this country, that American workers cannot exist on $7.25 an hour, which is the national minimum wage now, or $8 an hour, or $9 an hour. My own view is at the very least we should be raising the minimum wage to $10 an hour. Just do the arithmetic. If somebody is making $7.25 an hour, and if they are lucky enough to be getting 40 hours a week, and many workers are not. I was in Detroit a couple of months ago talking to fast food workers, and what they are saying is they get 20 hours a week in one place. To make a living, they got to work in another place. And one young man I talked to is working at 3 separate locations, having to travel in order to cobble together what in fact is less than a livable income by far. Just do the arithmetic. If you make $7.25 an hour, and if you're lucky enough to be working 40 hours a week, you're making about $15,000 a year, and then your Social Security taxes are coming out of that, your Medicare taxes are coming out of that, maybe some local taxes. You don't survive on $14,000 or $15,000 a year. So the point here is that these fast food workers are educating the nation about the fact that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people are working hard every single day, and they're falling further and further behind economically. We have got to stand with them, and we have got to raise the minimum wage in this country. Mr. President, meanwhile, while workers at the fast food establishments and at other places like Walmart are earning minimum wage, I should mention to you that the CEOs of these large corporations are in many cases making exorbitant compensation packages. The CEO of Burger King, a corporation with over 191,000 mostly low-wage workers, gave its CEO, Bernardo Hayes, a 61% pay raise last year, boosting his total compensation to $6.5 million in 2012. Well, if a millionaire can get a 65% pay raise, maybe it's time to get a pay raise for the workers who are making $7.25 an hour. Last year, McDonald's, a corporation with over 850,000 mostly low-wage employees, more than tripled the compensation of its CEO, Don Thompson. In 2011, Mr. Thompson received a mere paltry $4.1 million. But last year, because of his significant raise, the CEO of McDonald's received $13.8 million. Well, if Mr. Thompson can make $13.8 million as the head of McDonald's, surely the workers at McDonald's can make at least $10 an hour, not $7.25 an hour, not $8 an hour. David Novak, the CEO of Yum Brands, the owners of Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and Long John Silver's, was paid $11.3 million last year and received over $44 million in stock option. Well, if the companies have enough money to give this gentleman $44 million in stock options, maybe we can end starvation wages at Yum Foods. Mr. President, in terms of the minimum wage. Since 1968, the real value of the federal minimum wage has fallen by close to 30%. The purchasing power of the minimum wage has gone down by some 30% since 1968. If the minimum wage had kept up with inflation since 1968, it would be worth approximately $10.56 per hour today. Mr. President, the issue that our young people working in fast foods are highlighting goes beyond the fast food industry. And the reality is that many of the new jobs being created in America today are low-wage jobs. Now, I think we all recognize, even some of my Republican colleagues understand, that we have made significant economic gains since the collapse of the economy at the end of President Bush's tenure in 2008, when we were losing 700,000 jobs a month, an unsustainable reality. 700,000 jobs a month. Well, now we're gaining jobs, and that's a good thing. Not enough jobs. Unemployment remains much, much too high. Real unemployment today is close to 14%. But in the midst of understanding the job creation process in this country, we need to know that nearly two-thirds of the jobs gained since 2009 are low-wage jobs that paid less than $13.80 an hour. So the good news is we are now creating some jobs, not enough jobs. Unemployment remains much too high. But we cannot lose track of the fact that most of the new jobs that are being created are not paying working people a living wage. Meanwhile, while most of the new jobs being created are low-wage jobs, we should remember that nearly two-thirds of the jobs lost during the Wall Street recession were middle-class jobs that paid up to $21 an hour. So the economic trend is not good. The Wall Street crash results in mass unemployment. We're gaining new jobs. Many of the jobs we're gaining are low-wage jobs. The jobs that we have lost are higher-wage jobs. And also, while we discuss the state of the economy, let's never, never forget that middle-class families have seen their incomes go down by nearly $5,000 since 1999 after adjusting for inflation. Mr. President, opponents, and there are many, the entire fast food industry and all the big money interests, the guys who make millions and millions of dollars a year, the people who have unbelievable pensions, who have all kinds of benefits as CEOs, they are working very, very hard to tell us in Congress not to raise the minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour. And among many other arguments, they say, well, you raise the minimum wage, it is going to be a job killer. It will kill jobs. Well, let me just say this on a personal basis. I represent the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont has the third highest minimum wage in the country. It is $8.60 an hour. Meanwhile, with an $8.60 an hour minimum wage, I'm happy to tell you that the state of Vermont has the fourth lowest unemployment rate in the United States at 4.4%. And to be very honest with you, I have not bumped into many employers who tell me that I'll be hiring more and more people if we lowered the minimum wage in Vermont. It does not happen. I think that is a bogus argument. The state of Washington, if my memory is correct, has the highest minimum wage in the country. Their unemployment rate is lower than the national average. Mr. President, there is another point that I want to make, which needs, I think, to be made over and over again. You know, we talk a lot in this country about welfare reform. And I think in general, when people use that expression, what they're talking about are lower-income people who may be breaking the law and taking advantage of programs that they're not quite eligible for. Let me say a word about the need for welfare reform, but in a somewhat different tone. And let me tell you, Mr. President, that the biggest welfare recipient in this country happens to be the wealthiest family in the United States of America, and that is the Walton family, who owns Walmart, a family that is worth $100 billion, more wealth, by the way, than the bottom 40% of the American people. The wealthiest family in America is the largest welfare recipient in America. Now, how is that? Well, the reason they are so wealthy, the reason that that family is worth $100 billion is they make huge profits because they pay their workers starvation wages. But in order to keep their workers going, the taxpayers of this country, through Medicaid, through nutrition programs, through affordable housing, give assistance to Walmart so that their workers can keep coming to work. So somebody who works at Walmart for $7.25 an hour or $8 an hour, as often as not, their children are on Medicaid, paid for by the taxpayers of this country. They and their kids are on food stamps, paid for by the taxpayers of this country. Many of their employees live in affordable housing subsidized by the taxpayers of this country. So the Walton family becomes the wealthiest family in this country, while working class and middle class taxpayers provide assistance to their workers so they can continue coming to work. So I think, let me make the very radical idea that maybe the wealthiest family in America might want to pay its employees a living wage so that the taxpayers of this country do not have to subsidize them. So, Mr. President, I just want to conclude by telling those young people around the country, in major cities around this country, that many of us respect and appreciate the courage that they are showing. It's not easy to walk out of a job when you don't have any money, because your employer may say, you're out here, you're fired. But these young people have the courage to stand up and say, no, we are human beings. We live in the greatest country on earth. We have got to earn a living wage. We can't make it on starvation wages. So I want to thank those young people for standing up for justice, not only for themselves, but for all Americans. And I hope that members of Congress listen carefully to what they are saying, and that we go forward as soon as possible in passing a minimum wage which will provide dignity for millions and millions of workers. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
So as we wait for senators to come back to the floor here, the next order of business, as we understand it anyway, there's a vote they're supposed to take about a nomination for the U.S. Appeals Court. We expect a vote after that one that would be on limiting debate on spending for 2014 transportation, housing, and community development. Senator's going to take a break, as you can see on your screen there, from 12:30 till about 2, and then this afternoon they'll take up the nomination of Samantha Power to be the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations.
Mr. President, for the time being, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call. The Senate is in a quorum call.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Are we in a quorum call? I ask consent that be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we know what's ahead of us the next hour or so. I would like to ask unanimous consent that we change that. In between the vote on Chen, the judge, and the next vote, I would ask there be 10 minutes, and 2 minutes of that would be 1 minute on each side, and 8 minutes would be given to the co-manager of the bill, the Fed bill, Susan Collins.
Without objection.
That'd be for debate only, that 10 minutes.
Without objection. Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, we have spent the last several weeks.
We are in a quorum call.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent.
We're not in a quorum call.
Mr. President, we have spent the last 2 weeks here on the Senate floor talking about our bipartisan transportation and housing bill. This is a bill that is all about creating jobs, investing in our families and our communities, and laying down a strong foundation for long-term and broad-based economic growth. This bill is not exactly a bill that I would have written on my own. I know it's not exactly a bill that Senator Collins would have written on her own. But it is a compromise bill that reflects the deep cuts we made when we set spending levels in the Budget Control Act, as well as the best ideas from both sides of the aisle of ways that we can improve and reform our transportation and housing investments. The transportation and housing investments in this bill have a direct impact on the families and communities that we represent, from improving our roads to reduce traffic and help Main Street businesses, to making sure that our bridges are safe so we don't see more collapses like the one back home in my state of Washington, to supporting our most vulnerable families and seniors and veterans with a roof over their heads when they need it the most, to the investments in our communities that mayors across our country use to create local jobs in their own hometowns, and so much more. Senator Collins and I worked very hard together to write a bipartisan bill to invest in programs that should not be partisan, and I think we succeeded. 6 Republicans voted for this bill in committee. 73 senators voted to bring this bill to the floor for a debate. And that debate was a full and open one, with amendments and votes from Democrats and Republicans. So, Mr. President, I want to personally thank Senator Collins for her hard work on this bill. And I also want to thank all of our staff on the Appropriations Subcommittee, Alex Keenan, Dabney Haig, Megan McCarthy, Rachel Milberg, and Dan Broder, as well as Senator Collins' staff, who spent endless hours, Heidi Shamarodi, Kenneth Altman, Jason Woolwine, and Rajat Mathur, all of whom worked so hard and put in so many hours and late nights on this strong bipartisan bill. So, Mr. President, after 2 weeks of debate and discussion and a bipartisan bill before us, we are now going to move very shortly to a final vote. And I want to be clear, this bill has the support of the majority of the caucus. In the House of Representatives, what did we see happen yesterday? They pulled their transportation and housing bill off the floor. The Republican leadership wouldn't even allow a vote on their bill because they didn't have a majority in their caucus. And the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee said that that showed that sequestration is unworkable and needs to be replaced. That is the House Republican chairman. But here in the Senate, we have a majority, and we should move to pass this bill. Mr. President, the only thing that can block the passage of this bill, the only way a bipartisan bill with the support of the majority could be stopped, is if Republican leaders whip their own members into filibustering a jobs and infrastructure bill that many of those Republicans actually support. That's the only way. So, Mr. President, the choice before us is clear, and I urge my colleagues to make the right one. This vote isn't about whether or not you support this exact bill or agreeing with the exact spending level. As Senator Collins has made clear again and again, you can think the spending level is too high and still support this process in which we pass a bill in the Senate and work with the House bill on a compromise. And you can certainly disagree with the bill and not think it should be subjected to a filibuster. Mr. President, the bottom line is that a vote to wrap up and vote on this bill is a vote for jobs and the economy and for bipartisan solutions to the problems facing our nation. A vote to filibuster this bill is a vote for more gridlock, more obstruction, more partisanship, and more political games. I know when I go home to Washington State, I want to be able to tell my constituents that Democrats and Republicans worked together to solve some problems, help them, and grow the economy. I know there are many Democrats and Republicans here today who want to be able to say the same to their constituents. And I hope they will stand with me and with Senator Collins and vote against a filibuster of our bipartisan bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.